The courtroom was packed with people that Tuesday morning in London. Everyone sat quietly as Judge Harrison looked through his papers. The case was about a robbery that happened 3 months ago at a jewelry store. The police had caught 3 men, but something didn't feel right about the whole situation. In the front row sat Mrs. Eleanor Matthews with her 8-year-old grandson, Tommy. She had brought him because she couldn't find anyone to watch him that day. Tommy was supposed to be a witness because he had seen something important on the day of the robbery. His grandmother held his small hand tightly as they waited for their turn. The 3 accused men sat with their lawyers on the left side of the room. They all looked nervous and kept whispering to each other. On the right side, the prosecution team was getting ready to present their case. They had witnesses, security camera footage, and other evidence that seemed to point directly at these 3 men. But Tommy kept staring at something else in the courtroom. His eyes were fixed on the 2 royal guards who stood near the judge's bench. These guards always stood in important courtrooms to represent the Crown's authority. They wore their traditional red uniforms with shiny buttons and tall black hats. Most people barely noticed them because they were so common in British courts. Tommy's grandmother noticed him staring and gently pulled his hand to get his attention. She whispered to him to sit still and be quiet until it was their turn to speak. But Tommy couldn't stop looking at one of the guards. Something about the man's face seemed familiar, but he couldn't remember where he had seen him before. The prosecutor stood up and began explaining the case to the jury. He said that on March 15th, 3 men had broken into Matthew's jewelry store on High Street. They had stolen valuable diamonds, gold necklaces, and expensive watches worth over £50,000. The security cameras had captured their faces, and several witnesses had seen them running away from the store. Tommy listened carefully because it was his family's jewelry store that had been robbed. His grandfather had owned it for 30 years before he died last year. Now his grandmother was trying to keep the business running, but the robbery had hurt them badly. They needed the insurance money to stay open, but first they had to catch the real thieves. As the prosecutor continued talking, Tommy suddenly remembered something. 3 months ago, on the day of the robbery, he had been playing in the park across from the jewelry store. He was waiting for his grandmother to finish work so they could go home together. That's when he saw something that the police hadn't believed when he first told them about it. The young boy's heart started beating faster as the memory became clearer. He remembered seeing a man in a uniform near the store just before the robbery happened. The man had been acting strange, looking around nervously and checking his watch many times. Tommy had thought it was odd, because the man seemed to be watching the store instead of doing his job. Now, sitting in the courtroom, Tommy realized why the royal guard looked so familiar. It was the same face he had seen that day near his grandmother's store. The same eyes, the same nose, and the same scar on his left cheek that Tommy had noticed because it looked like a small lightning bolt. Tommy tugged on his grandmother's sleeve, but she shushed him quietly. The prosecutor was now showing pictures of the 3 accused men to the jury. Everyone in the courtroom was focused on these photos, trying to decide if these were really the men who had committed the crime. But Tommy knew something that nobody else knew. The real criminal was standing right there in the courtroom, wearing a royal guard uniform and pretending to protect justice. The boy felt scared, but also excited because he knew he had discovered something very important. He just had to find a way to tell everyone without getting in trouble. Tommy's mind was racing as he stared at the royal guard. The man stood perfectly still, just like guards are trained to do, but Tommy could see small drops of sweat on his forehead. That was strange because the courtroom wasn't very warm that day. The prosecution continued presenting their evidence against the 3 accused men. They showed the security camera footage from inside the jewelry store. The video was grainy and dark, making it hard to see the faces clearly. The 3 men on the footage wore dark clothes and baseball caps that covered most of their features. Tommy's grandmother was called to testify about what she had seen that day. She walked to the witness stand with slow, careful steps. Her voice shook a little as she described coming back from lunch to find her store had been robbed. She explained how the thieves had broken the display cases and taken her most valuable pieces. While his grandmother spoke, Tommy noticed the royal guard shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Most people wouldn't notice such a small movement, but Tommy was watching him carefully. The guard's eyes kept moving around the room instead of staring straight ahead like the other guard was doing. The defense lawyers began questioning Tommy's grandmother. They suggested that maybe she hadn't locked the store properly or that the insurance company was pressuring her to blame innocent men. Their questions made her upset, and Tommy could see tears forming in her eyes. He felt angry that they were being mean to his grandmother when she had done nothing wrong. Then it was Tommy's turn to testify. His legs felt wobbly as he walked to the witness stand. The judge smiled kindly at him and explained that he just needed to tell the truth about what he had seen. Tommy looked out at all the faces staring at him and felt very nervous. The prosecutor asked Tommy to describe what he had seen on the day of the robbery. Tommy explained that he had been playing in the park when he noticed a man in a uniform acting suspiciously near the jewelry store. He said the man kept looking around and checking his watch like he was waiting for something to happen. The defense lawyer stood up and asked Tommy what kind of uniform the man was wearing. Tommy said it looked like a police uniform or maybe a security guard uniform. He couldn't remember exactly because he had been far away and playing at the same time. But then Tommy looked directly at the royal guard and felt his heart pounding. He was absolutely sure this was the same man he had seen that day. The scar on the guard's cheek was exactly the same shape he remembered. Even the way the man held his shoulders was familiar. Tommy wanted to point at the guard and tell everyone what he had discovered, but he felt scared. What if the adults didn't believe him? What if the guard got angry and did something bad? The boy looked at his grandmother, who gave him an encouraging smile, and then back at the guard. The guard must have sensed that Tommy was staring at him because he turned his head slightly. When their eyes met, Tommy saw something that made him even more certain. The guard's eyes widened with fear and recognition. He knew that Tommy had figured out who he really was. At that moment, the guard made a small mistake that only Tommy noticed. He touched the scar on his cheek with his finger, exactly the same way Tommy had seen him do it 3 months ago outside the jewelry store. It was like a nervous habit that the man couldn't control when he felt worried. Tommy's hands began to shake as he realized he was sitting just a few feet away from the real criminal. The 3 innocent men might go to prison, while the actual thief was standing right there in the courtroom, trusted to protect justice and law. The boy knew he had to do something, but he wasn't sure how to make the adults listen to him. The prosecutor was asking Tommy more questions about the day of the robbery, when something unexpected happened. Tommy was trying to concentrate on answering, but he kept glancing at the royal guard. Suddenly, the guard dropped his ceremonial sword, and it clattered loudly on the marble floor. Everyone in the courtroom turned to look at the noise. The judge frowned because royal guards were trained never to drop their equipment. The other guard looked surprised and embarrassed for his partner. But Tommy saw something different in the man's face, pure panic. The guard quickly picked up his sword and returned to his position, but his hands were shaking slightly. Tommy noticed that the man's face had turned pale, and there were now visible sweat stains on his red uniform. This wasn't normal behavior for a professional royal guard who was supposed to remain calm in all situations. The prosecutor continued asking Tommy about the suspicious man he had seen. Tommy described how the man had been standing near a lamppost, pretending to read a newspaper but actually watching the jewelry store. He explained that the man kept folding and unfolding the newspaper, which seemed nervous and strange. As Tommy spoke, he watched the royal guard's reaction. The man was trying hard to look normal, but Tommy could see his jaw muscles getting tight. The guard was clenching his teeth so hard that a small vein was showing on his forehead. It was like watching someone try not to explode with worry. The defense lawyer stood up to question Tommy again. He asked if Tommy was absolutely sure about what he had seen. Maybe he was confused, or maybe his memory was playing tricks on him. After all, Tommy was just a child, and children sometimes imagine things that didn't really happen. Tommy felt frustrated because the lawyer was treating him like he was too young to remember correctly. But he knew exactly what he had seen that day. The suspicious man had been there for almost an hour before the robbery happened. Tommy had even seen him throw away the newspaper in a trash can before walking away quickly. Then Tommy remembered something else important. On the day of the robbery, after the police arrived, He had told his grandmother about the suspicious man. She had mentioned it to the police officers, but they said they were too busy collecting evidence inside the store to look for a newspaper in the trash. The judge asked if Tommy had anything else to add to his testimony. This was Tommy's chance to tell everyone about the Royal Guard, but he still felt scared. What if he was wrong? What if he got in trouble for accusing an important person? The boy looked at his grandmother, who nodded encouragingly at him. Tommy took a deep breath and said he had seen the suspicious man's face clearly, because the man had looked directly at him once. He described the lightning bolt-shaped scar on the left cheek, and how the man had a habit of touching it when he seemed nervous or worried. At the mention of the scar, the Royal Guard's hand automatically moved toward his own cheek before he caught himself and put it back down. Tommy saw this reaction and felt more confident that he was right. The man was definitely the same person he had seen on the day of the robbery. The courtroom was very quiet as everyone listened to Tommy's description. The jury members were taking notes, and even the 3 accused men were paying close attention. They probably hoped that Tommy's testimony about a different suspicious man might help prove their innocence. Tommy looked around the room and then directly at the Royal Guard. The man was staring straight ahead now, trying hard to look professional and uninterested. But Tommy could see a thin line of sweat running down from under his tall black hat. The guard was definitely nervous about something, and Tommy was becoming more certain that he knew exactly what that something was. The prosecutor thanked Tommy for his testimony and said he could return to his seat. But as Tommy stood up from the witness chair, he made a decision that would change everything. Instead of walking back to his grandmother, he was going to do something that would shock everyone in the courtroom. Tommy stood up from the witness chair, and instead of walking back to his seat, he turned toward the Royal Guards. The entire courtroom watched in confusion as the young boy took several steps in their direction. His grandmother called his name, softly, thinking he was just confused about where to go. But Tommy wasn't confused at all. He walked right up to the Royal Guard with the scar and pointed his small finger directly at the man's face. In a clear, loud voice that echoed through the silent courtroom, Tommy said, "That's him. That's the man I saw outside my grandmother's store on the day it was robbed." The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs and gasps. The judge banged his gavel and called for order, but people couldn't stop talking about what the boy had just done. No one had ever seen a child accuse a Royal Guard of being a criminal. It was almost unthinkable. The Royal Guard's face went completely white, and his whole body began to tremble. He tried to speak, but only strange choking sounds came out of his mouth. The other guard looked at his partner in complete shock, not understanding what was happening. The defense lawyers jumped up from their seats, sensing that this unexpected development might save their clients. The prosecutor looked confused and concerned, not sure how to handle such an unusual situation. The judge demanded that everyone remain calm while he figured out what to do next. Tommy's grandmother hurried over to her grandson, worried that he might be in trouble for making such a serious accusation. But Tommy wasn't finished. He looked up at the judge and said, "He has the same scar I told you about, and he keeps touching it just like he did that day. I remember because it looks like lightning." The accused Royal Guard finally found his voice and stammered, "This is ridiculous. I'm a Royal Guard. I've served the crown for 15 years. This child is obviously mistaken." But his voice was shaky, and sweat was now pouring down his face despite the cool temperature in the courtroom. The judge called for a brief recess to discuss this unexpected turn of events with the lawyers. During the break, Tommy explained to his grandmother exactly why he was so sure about the guard's identity. He described how the man had been acting nervous that day, how he had folded and refolded his newspaper, and how he had kept checking his watch. The prosecutor approached Tommy and his grandmother during the recess. He asked Tommy if he was absolutely certain about his identification. Tommy nodded firmly and said he would never forget that face or that scar. He had been playing alone in the park that day and had plenty of time to observe the suspicious man. Meanwhile, the Royal Guard was having a heated whispered conversation with his supervisor, who had been called to the courtroom. The supervisor looked very concerned and kept shaking his head as the guard tried to explain the situation. Other court officials were also gathering around, trying to understand what was happening. When court resumed, The judge announced that they would investigate Tommy's accusation immediately. He ordered that the royal guard be temporarily removed from his duties pending a full investigation. The man protested loudly, insisting that his record was spotless and that he had never committed any crimes. But as two security officers approached to escort the guard out of the courtroom, something incredible happened. The man suddenly broke down completely. His professional composure cracked and he began shouting that it wasn't his fault, that he had been forced into it, and that he never meant for anyone to get hurt. The courtroom fell silent again, as everyone realized that Tommy had been right. The 8-year-old boy had identified the real criminal when all the adults and professional investigators had missed him completely. The guard continued his emotional outburst, admitting that he had indeed been involved in the robbery, but claiming that he was being blackmailed by dangerous people. Tommy felt both scared and proud as he watched the dramatic scene unfold. He had trusted his memory and his instincts, even when it seemed impossible that a royal guard could be a criminal. His grandmother hugged him tightly, amazed by her grandson's courage and sharp observation skills. The former royal guard, whose name was revealed to be Marcus Webb, was taken to a separate room for immediate questioning. The 3 originally accused men were released from custody, while the investigation took a completely new direction. The judge postponed the trial to allow police to gather new evidence based on Tommy's identification. Within hours, Detective Inspector Sarah Collins was assigned to investigate Marcus Webb's involvement in the jewelry store robbery. She was amazed by Tommy's sharp memory and observation skills. The detective asked Tommy to describe everything he remembered about that day, and his detailed account provided crucial information that had been missing from the original investigation. Tommy explained that he had seen Marcus Webb throw away a newspaper in the trash can near the park. Detective Collins immediately sent officers to search the area, hoping the trash hadn't been collected yet. Miraculously, they found old newspapers in a recycling bin, including one with Marcus Webb's fingerprints on it. The paper was dated the exact day of the robbery. During questioning, Marcus Webb finally confessed to his role in the crime. He admitted that he had been gambling heavily and owed dangerous people a lot of money. When he couldn't pay his debts, the criminals threatened to hurt his family unless he helped them rob the jewelry store. They chose the store because Webb knew the area well from his work at the courthouse nearby. Webb explained that his job was to watch the store and signal the real thieves when it was safe to break in. He was supposed to text them when Tommy's grandmother left for lunch and when the street was relatively empty. The criminals had told him that no one would suspect a uniformed man of being involved in the crime. The detective discovered that Webb had been sending text messages to unknown phone numbers on the day of the robbery. Phone records showed multiple messages sent around the time of the crime. The criminals had used Webb's inside information about court schedules to plan the robbery when they knew he would be working nearby. Tommy's grandmother was called in to provide additional testimony about her lunch schedule and daily routine. She confirmed that she always left the store at the same time each day, making it easy for criminals to predict when the building would be empty. Webb had observed her routine during his many trips to the courthouse over several months. The investigation revealed that Webb had not acted alone, but was part of a larger criminal organization. Police used the phone numbers from his text messages to track down the actual robbers. Within a week, they arrested 4 more people who had been involved in planning and carrying out the theft. The real thieves were career criminals who specialized in targeting small family businesses. They had been watching several jewelry stores in the area, looking for the easiest target. When they learned that Webb worked near Matthew's jewelry store and needed money desperately, they saw the perfect opportunity to use him as their inside source. Tommy became a local hero when news of his identification spread through the community. Newspapers wrote stories about the brave young boy who solved a case that had stumped professional investigators. His school invited him to speak to other students about the importance of paying attention to details and trusting your memory. The 3 innocent men who had been wrongly accused thanked Tommy and his grandmother personally. They had been facing serious prison sentences for crimes they didn't commit. One of the men had been about to lose his job, another was worried about his children, and the third had been planning to propose to his girlfriend before the arrest ruined his plans. Detective Collins praised Tommy's exceptional observation skills and encouraged him to consider a career in law enforcement when he grew up. She explained that many adult witnesses failed to notice important details that Tommy had remembered perfectly after 3 months. His description of Marcus Webb's nervous habits and distinctive scar had been crucial to solving the case. The stolen jewelry was recovered from the real thieves' hiding place, allowing Tommy's grandmother to reopen her store with confidence. The insurance company, impressed by the successful resolution of the case, processed her claim quickly and even offered her additional security services at a discount. 6 months later, the full trial of Marcus Webb and his criminal accomplices took place. Tommy testified again, this time as the star witness who had broken the case wide open. He was no longer nervous about speaking in court and answered all questions with confidence and clarity. Marcus Webb received a reduced sentence because he cooperated fully with police and helped them understand how the criminal organization operated. He admitted that gambling addiction had destroyed his judgment and led him to betray his oath as a royal guard. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in prison, but acknowledged that his cooperation had prevented other families from becoming victims. The 4 actual robbers received much harsher sentences because they had previous criminal records and showed no remorse for their actions. They had been planning to target several more jewelry stores using the same method of corrupting people who worked in positions of trust. Tommy's brave identification had stopped their crime spree before it could continue. Tommy's story inspired changes in how the Royal Guard Service screens and monitors its employees. New psychological evaluations were implemented to identify guards who might be vulnerable to blackmail or corruption. Regular financial checks were also introduced to catch gambling problems or debt issues before they could lead to criminal behavior. The young boy received several awards for his courage and civic duty. The mayor of London presented him with a special medal at a ceremony attended by hundreds of people. The local police department made him an honorary junior detective and gave him a badge that he treasured more than any toy. Tommy's elementary school created a special program teaching children about the importance of being observant and speaking up. When they noticed something wrong, Tommy became the program's first student ambassador, sharing his experience with younger children who were amazed by his story. The Matthews family jewelry store became more successful than ever after the publicity from the case. Customers came from all over London to meet Tommy and his grandmother, and many bought jewelry to support the family business. Tommy's grandmother was able to expand the store and hire additional employees for the first time in years. Detective Inspector Collins stayed in touch with Tommy and his family, visiting them several times to see how they were doing. She encouraged Tommy's interest in detective work by giving him puzzle books and mystery stories to solve. Tommy enjoyed trying to figure out the solutions before reading the endings. Marcus Webb wrote a letter to Tommy from prison, apologizing for his actions and thanking the boy for having the courage to tell the truth. He explained that being caught had actually saved him from getting deeper into debt and more serious crimes. Webb was receiving help for his gambling addiction and hoped to rebuild his life after serving his sentence. The case became a textbook, example taught in police academies about the importance of listening to all witnesses, regardless of their age. Many veteran detectives admitted they would have dismissed a child's testimony about a royal guard being suspicious, but Tommy's case proved that truth can come from unexpected sources. Tommy grew up to become exactly what Detective Collins had predicted, a successful police officer who specialized in solving complex cases. He never forgot the lesson he learned as an 8-year-old, that paying attention to details and having the courage to speak up can make the difference between justice and injustice. Years later, when Tommy had become Detective Sergeant Thomas Matthews, he often told young officers about his first case. He reminded them that the truth doesn't care about uniforms, titles, or positions of authority. Sometimes the most important witness is the one person everyone else overlooks. And sometimes solving a case requires the fresh eyes of someone who sees what adults have trained themselves not to notice. The Royal Guard uniform that Marcus Webb once wore was retired and placed in a museum as a reminder that trust and honor must be earned every day, not just assumed because of the clothes someone wears or the position they hold.